Welcome to the Deep Dive. Before we jump into today's topic, just a quick word from our sponsor. This deep dive is brought to you by Stonefly. When it comes to enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions, Stonefly is really a leader. They are known for providing secure, ransomware-proof storage through things like air-gapped and immutable solutions. So if you're looking for that level of security for your critical data, you should contact sales at stonefly.com to schedule a demo and see how Stonefly can help you out. Okay, let's dive in then. We're tackling a pretty significant cybersecurity event today. It's one that's really made waves across the IT landscape, especially for anyone using remote access software. And this isn't just, a routine patch. It involves suspicion of a nation-state actor targeting tools fundamental to how lots of businesses work.
That's right. The focus of our deep dive is this recent disclosure concerning ConnectWise ScreenConnect. It's a platform, as you said, used very widely by IT pros for remote support, maintenance, that kind of thing. We've been digging through the advisories, the technical write-ups, community chatter, really trying to piece together what exactly went down here.
So how did this first surface, ConnectWise? They initially reported finding some suspicious activity, right?
Yep.
Inside their own systems?
Yeah, exactly. They detected it internally, reacted pretty quickly, bringing in forensic experts, I think Mandiant was mentioned, and coordinating with law enforcement. Their first public statement pointed towards a sophisticated nation-state actor. And they also said, initially at least, that it affected a very small number of ScreenConnect customers, specifically on their cloud instances.
But one thing that jumps out from the reports is this potential timeline issue. That was May 2025, right?
Mm-hmm.
But some talk suggests the activity might have begun way earlier, maybe August, maybe November 2024. That seems like a long time for something to be potentially going on undetected.
It definitely raises eyebrows. It's a long potential dwell time. ConnectWise did follow up later, stating they'd implemented, enhanced monitoring, security hardening across their environment. And crucially, they said they hadn't observed further suspicious activity in customer environments since they put those response measures in place.
Okay, so the immediate fire related to this specific campaign seems contained, at least in the cloud, after they responded.
That seems to be the message, yes.
All right, let's get into the technical weeds a bit, because this part is fascinating. It really zooms in on a specific attack vector. At the heart of it is this vulnerability, CVE-2025-3935.
Right. CVE-2025-3935. This one affects ScreenConnect versions 25.2.3 and earlier. And the mechanism technically involves something called a ViewState code injection attack. It leverages a feature within the underlying framework ScreenConnect uses, which is ASP.NET Web Forms.
Okay, ViewState, ASP.NET Web Forms. Let's break that down a little. Can you explain ViewState simply? Why is it even there?
Sure. Think of ViewState like a hidden field on a web page that helps the page remember stuff between clicks or page loads, like the state of controls, text inboxes, that kind of thing. ASP.NET bundles this information up, encodes it, usually base64, puts it right into the page source. And importantly, it's supposed to be protected by server-side secrets called machine keys.
Machine keys, like passwords for the server itself.
Sorta, yeah. A validation key and a decryption key. They're meant to ensure that the ViewState data hasn't been tampered with and sometimes to encrypt it.
Okay, so it helps the page remember, and it's protected by these keys. Now, CVE 2025-3935, the descriptions mention this ViewState mechanism. What's the absolute critical thing an attacker needs before they can even try to exploit this?
This is really the nub of it, based on the technical reports. To actually exploit this specific CVE, an attacker must first get their hands on those ASP.NET machine keys. And getting those keys, that requires privileged system-level access to the server where ScreenConnect is actually running, like administrator or root access.
Wait, hold on. So the vulnerability isn't just that ScreenConnect used ViewState. It's that if an attacker already compromised the server at a high level, stole these secret keys, then they could use those keys to craft a malicious ViewState payload.
Exactly.
And potentially achieve remote code execution, RCE, meaning run their own commands on the server.
That's the scenario described. The vulnerability lies in how ASP.NET processes that ViewState data if the protective keys are compromised. It opens the door to deserialization attacks. So the risk here for this specific CVE isn't framed as a flaw ScreenConnect introduced, but exploiting this underlying platform behavior after that major prerequisite, the compromised keys, is met. And it seems focused on the server-side application, not, the ScreenConnect client software that technicians use day to day.
Okay, that makes sense. But the vulnerability is still rated high severity, CVSS 8.1. And the vector string, it says high attack complexity, but also no privileges required. and no user interaction required. That seems contradictory if you need admin access for the keys first.
Yeah, it can look a bit confusing. The CVSS vector often describes the exploit phase itself. So, assuming the attacker somehow already has the compromised machine keys, which, yes, required prior privileged access, then actually crafting and delivering the malicious ViewState payload to trigger the RCE has high technical complexity. But at that point of exploitation, the attacker doesn't need additional privileges on the system beyond having the keys, nor do they need a user to click anything.
Ah, okay. So the no privileges required applies only to the moment of triggering the ViewState bug itself, after the attacker has already done the hard work of getting the keys.
That appears to be the interpretation, yes. Which really emphasizes that the initial compromise, how those keys were obtained, is the big unanswered question here.
Right. That initial foothold is key.
Precisely. The attack chain must have started somewhere else.
Okay, let's shift to ConnectWise's response. What did they do immediately once this came out? Patching, obviously.
Yes, patching was the primary action. They released ScreenConnect version 25.2.4 pretty quickly, and this update addresses the issue quite directly. It disables ViewState usage within the ScreenConnect application altogether and removes the dependencies on it. Basically takes that whole mechanism off the table for ScreenConnect.
And for customers, how do they get this fix?
It depended on how they used ScreenConnect. For the cloud instances, the ones ConnectWise hosts themselves, ConnectWise applied the updates automatically, so those customers were covered without needing to do anything specific for the patch.
Makes sense. But what about all the users running it on their own servers, the on-premises installs?
Right, for on-prem users, the update had to be done manually. ConnectWise provided guidance, usually involving an upgrade path. Like you might need to go from version 22.8 to 23.3 and then up to the latest 25.2.4. They also released free security patches for some older but still relatively recent versions, back to 23.9, which was helpful for partners maybe off active maintenance plans, though the strong recommendation was always to get to the latest fully patched version, 25.2.4.
And the core message was just patch now.
Absolutely. They emphasized that patching was the single most important thing partners could do to protect themselves against this specific CVE.
So we have the vendor side, the technical nuts and bolts. But what's the feeling out in the community? Looking through forums, security discussions, there seems to be a mix of understanding and, well, frustration.
That's definitely true. A major point of contention you see pop up again and again is the perceived lack of detailed information, particularly specific indicators of compromise, or IOCs. Without those specifics, file hashes, IP addresses, registry keys, that sort of thing, it makes it really hard for customers, especially the self-hosted ones, to effectively hunt for signs of compromise in their own environments, or to definitively say we weren't hit.
Yeah, that lack of transparency can be tough. And what about the whole nation-state actor label? Is everyone buying that, or is there skepticism? Could it just be very skilled criminals?
That's a really interesting debate happening. And, a point often raised is how blurry the lines have become. Sophisticated criminal groups are using tactics, supply chain attacks, long-term persistence that used to be purely the domain of nation-states. So definitive attribution is incredibly difficult, and maybe sometimes less important than just understanding the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, regardless of who's actually behind the keyboard.
Right, focus on the how, not just the who.
Yeah.
And back to the technical side, that need for compromised machine keys. The community must be buzzing with theories on how attackers got those keys, right? Was it another 0-day, a misconfiguration, phishing?
Exactly. Those are the big unknowns. How did that initial privileged access happen? That's where more detail about the incident's origins would really help fill in the gaps for everyone trying to understand the full picture.
This whole thing also seems to have poured fuel on the classic on-prem versus cloud debate, hasn't it? Specifically for security.
Oh, absolutely. You saw some initial reactions from self-hosted users feeling maybe a bit safer because they control their own network perimeter. But then others quickly pointed out, well, the cloud instances got patched automatically and likely benefit from ConnectWise's dedicated 24/7 monitoring, which many smaller shops running on-prem just can't replicate. And it's crucial to remember, while this specific CVE needed those keys first, other major ScreenConnect vulnerabilities in the past did directly impact on-prem installs, sometimes quite badly, especially if they were a bit behind on patching.
That's a really important point. History matters here. The ScreenConnect has been targeted before, right? Weren't there some big ones fairly recently?
Yes, exactly. Thinking back to early 2024, vulnerabilities like CVE-2024-1708 and CVE-2024-1709 were actively exploited. And by a mix of actors, too, criminal ransomware groups like Black Basta were using them, but also suspected nation-state groups like North Korea's Kimsuki.
So it's clearly a high-value target for attackers of all stripes.
Definitely underscores why keeping it locked down and patched is critical.
And there was one other slightly weird detail floating around in the community discussions. Something about bogus login notification emails.
Yeah, that was interesting. Some users reported receiving suspicious login failure emails for months, possibly starting around that late 2024 timeframe when the breach might have begun. It's speculative, of course, but it could hint at maybe an earlier, broader exposure of things like root account email addresses or instance metadata. It just adds another layer of questioning about the full scope and timeline.
Wow. Okay, so this whole situation, the sophisticated attack, the technical details, the response, and the community reaction, it really throws a spotlight on the need for good cybersecurity forensics and incident response, doesn't it?
Absolutely critical. Forensics isn't just about figuring things out after everything's over. It's a systematic process. Identifying evidence, collecting it properly, preserving its integrity, analyzing it. In a case like this, it's how you answer the key questions. How did they get in? What did they do once inside? Which systems were touched? Where were the weaknesses? This information is vital not just for cleanup, but for plugging holes and preventing it from happening again.
And things like data integrity and chain of custody, making sure the evidence is reliable, are paramount, right?
Yeah.
Especially if it ever leads to legal action or insurance claims.
Totally. And forensics goes hand in glove with incident response, which is your action plan for the moment you suspect something's wrong. Incident response starts with containment, isolating affected machines quickly to stop the bleeding, basically.
And then, crucially, before you wipe and rebuild, you need to collect that evidence. Get disk images, memory dumps, logs, whatever the forensic analysts need. Then comes the analysis, understanding the attack, and then recovery and remediation.
It sounds like ConnectWise advice to potentially affected customers followed that pattern. Isolate, preserve evidence through backups, investigate before rushing back online.
Exactly. It's the standard necessary process.
Yeah.
But it's definitely getting harder these days. Forensics faces huge challenges. Widespread encryption making data unreadable, attackers using anti-forensics tools to cover their tracks, volatile data in memory vanishing when a system reboots, investigating across cloud environments and different jurisdictions. It's complex.
So bringing this all together after our deep dive into the ScreenConnect incident, what are the really crucial takeaways, the practical things listeners should be thinking about?
Number one, absolutely top of the list, has to be timely patch management. I know we sound like a broken record sometimes, but keeping all your software updated, especially powerful tools like remote access software, is just fundamental. Yeah, and patch management isn't just clicking update. It's having that solid inventory, knowing what you actually have.
Yeah.
It's prioritizing which patches are most critical now.
Right.
It's testing those patches first, ideally, and tracking it all.
Definitely. And beyond patching, don't forget the basics, the core security hygiene.
Yeah.
Strong access controls MFA everywhere you possibly can. Regular access reviews who still needs that admin account. And the principle of least privilege seriously, only give the permissions needed, nothing more.
And maybe this incident highlights the need for better monitoring and threat hunting, specifically around these critical remote access tools, looking for those weird logins, privilege escalations, unusual network traffic.
For sure. Continuous monitoring gives you a chance to catch things early. Be proactive. Hunt for anomalies related to these tools. Look for unexpected account creations, systems talking to weird places on the internet. And finally, have that incident response plan worked out before you need it. Know the steps, know who does what, know how you'll communicate internally and with vendors like ConnectWise if needed. Don't be figuring it out during a crisis.
Right. These aren't just reactive steps after hearing about ScreenConnect. This is about building that proactive security posture, that cyber resilience, day in and day out.
Exactly. Learning from incidents like this helps everyone get better prepared for the next threat because the landscape is constantly evolving, attackers are getting smarter, and attribution, as we discussed, isn't always clear-cut or even the main point.
Well, this has certainly been a fascinating, if slightly unsettling, deep dive into a major cybersecurity event affecting a tool so many rely on.
Yeah.
We've covered the incident, the technical vulnerability, the response, and hopefully some really critical takeaways for staying secure.
And it does leave you with a thought, doesn't it? When core IT infrastructure tools like this are targeted, it just highlights how interconnected everything is. One compromise can ripple out in so many directions.
Yeah, absolutely. What does that mean for how you, Listening now, think about trust and risk in the software supply chain, in tools you depend on every single day. Definitely something to chew on. And as we wrap up, just one final reminder that today's deep dive was brought to you by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. For truly secure, ransomware-proof storage, think about Stonefly's air-gapped and immutable solutions. You can reach out to them at sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.